Could Toji defeat Mahoraga? Let's talk about it. All right, first of all, shout out to Drummer who asked me about this, and he did specify that Toji would have all of his cursed tools. So the Soul Split Katana, the Inverted Spear, Playful Cloud, everything, right? Would he be able to defeat Mahoraga? And honestly, I don't think so. Like, Mahoraga needs to be taken out entirely in one go. Otherwise, he's gonna adapt. So even if he gets sliced up with a Soul Split Katana, he's gonna heal from that, and then he's gonna become immune to slashes, soul damage, whatever else, right? He can literally adapt to any and all phenomena. So I don't think anything in Toji's bag is really gonna get it done, unless we want to say that there would be some weird interaction between the Inverted Spear of Heaven and the fact that Mahoraga is a curse technique. Like, would that force cancel him and cause him to despawn? Personally, I don't think so, but I think that's the only window we could even consider. So while I don't think Toji could solo Mahoraga, what I will say is that he would certainly be a big help against Mahoraga, which gives me a good chance to plug one of my favorite theories and personal headcanons, which is perhaps the heavenly restricted users of the Zenin clan are tied by fate to the 10 Shadows users of the Zenin clan, and perhaps because of their anomalous existence without cursed energy, maybe they could participate in the taming ritual for Mahoraga without actually being registered in it, meaning they wouldn't negate it. So perhaps Megumi could have tagged in Toji or Maki to help him tame Mahoraga. And then as a follow-up, Drummer asked me, could Toji get stronger and faster than what we saw in the Hidden Inventory arc? Basically asking if heavenly restricted users like Toji and Maki can increase their power level through training, or do they just have like a static buff increase due to their bodies? And I think they can get stronger and faster. And even in Hidden Inventory, Toji mentioned that he was sloppy, like he was out of his prime. So he was slower and weaker than he had been before. But what I will say is that there obviously is just some sort of base level boost that heavenly restricted people have. So I don't think like you can increase that multiplier, if that makes sense, but I certainly think you can increase your own stamina and strength kind of like a normal person does. And maybe that's even amplified with them. So, just like we saw Maki kind of have stages of her awakening as she understood things, I definitely think they can grow. Then next up, while we're talking about Mahoraga, I got this comment from I'll Bring Him Down. And y'all pause to read the entire thing, but he's essentially just sharing his thoughts on the 10 Shadows and Mahoraga. But one thing in particular is he says that perhaps the Zenin clan made some sort of binding vow in order to get Mahoraga as a response to the limitless six-eyes power of the Gojo clan. Like maybe they wanted to keep up and thus Mahoraga was born. And I do think this is a cool headcanon. Honestly, we don't really know about the origins of curse techniques. It was just something that wasn't explored in the series, but I do have a couple of videos out there talking about, or I think at least one, talking about the idea that maybe all of curse techniques are results of some ancient binding vows or deals with cursed spirits in the past. In particular, I've talked about the theory where the three great vengeful spirits of Japan may be tied to the origins of the three big clans, so the Gojo, the Zenin, and the Kamo. So I think that something like that could be possible, but what I would say is that I doubt it was literally in response to the Gojo clans like Limitless and Six Eyes, just because I imagine that both things probably would have predated the existence of having to deal with the other. But I guess I don't really have any good reason to think that. So, I mean, who knows? And then finally today, I got a couple questions here from Lucas about cursed tools, starting with, why don't we see more people use them? Because no matter how strong you are, you could always just benefit from having more versatility and more firepower, right? And you do make a good point. Like, I do think that's true for a lot of people. I do think there's some people where it just doesn't make sense for them to wield a curse tool, like maybe because of their natural curse technique or their fighting style, right? But also it might be that people just don't have like the skill to wield a sword, right? And, obviously there's curse tools that kind of span all different types of items. So maybe you could find something that would cater to you. But at that point, I think we lead into the second issue, which is there aren't that many, right? And if there are, they're very expensive or treasured or kept away. Like they're not just easily accessible for any random person to go get and wield. However, for somebody like Yuji, which you point out, maybe we could have given him something, especially as a brawler without a curse technique for the vast majority of the series, right? So why didn't he? I guess it is plot. or again, maybe nothing really that would really have fit well with him was available. But yeah, I think ultimately it just wasn't something that Gege really experimented too much with. But then Lucas's second question was, why don't we see more sorcerers try to create curse tools? And I do have a video talking about how curse tools are made for anybody that's interested in that. But essentially, if you channel your cursed energy and cursed technique through something for a long enough period of time, it will become a cursed tool, like we saw with Nanami's cleaver. And I believe this just operates on the same principle of having something soaked in cursed energy and channeled long enough. The same way that, Yuji would get Sukuna's curse technique from Sukuna possessing his body long enough. So why don't we see every sorcerer with a technique doing this so that they can create one? I think, one, maybe some people's techniques don't really make sense to channel through objects. Like Nanami's obviously makes a lot of sense, right? And two, I think it requires a lot of dedication, right? I don't think it's as simple as just like pushing cursed energy into it. I do think you need to channel the technique through it. So again, depending on what your technique is, it may not be feasible to just do that in your downtime, right? So I think that's probably the main reason, but there also might be some sort of like regulations on this, or again, maybe it's just a matter of how long it actually takes. Like, for all we know, this literally was Nanami's entire adult life, right? So I think it's just a lot more difficult than it would seem. But even with that being the case, you would think like jujutsu sorcerers would just do it anyway because they're so valuable. But maybe people are worried about like them falling into the wrong hands or something. But again, ultimately here, I think this just falls back on Gege not really like taking the story and world building in that direction. But it is a good point, right? Everyone's homework should be like, hey, just channel that in that in case we need that next year. And then I lied because I actually got one more question that just came through that's relevant to what I was just talking about. So I wanted to throw this in here. So shout out to Boucha who asked me about this and said that I have a question that's been on my mind recently. And that is, if in theory being a vessel for Sukuna and being soaked in his cursed energy could ultimately result in you getting his curse technique, like with Yuji, then might that same thing happen with Megumi? And this is actually something I've talked about in videos before. So be sure to check that out, and I'll link it to my response to you in your comment. But I do think it's possible. I think it could go either way. Like maybe there were some different things about Yuji that really allowed that to happen, but I don't think it's because Yuji is tied to Sukuna in the way he is, because Gojo said to Yuji that you'll eventually get that technique before Gojo knew anything about Yuji's like history, right? So theoretically, Megumi could get this. And as far as how strong he could be, like he could certainly be pretty crazy, right? He would essentially be capable of what we saw from Sukuna, somebody who wielded the 10 Shadows and the Shrine, right? Now, I don't think Megumi will ever be as strong as Sukuna, but that's kind of the template he's working with. And I do plan on making a full potential Megumi video at some point where we'll go super in depth on all that. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one, y'all. As always, thank you for watching.